Thank you very much. Well, let me first begin by something that's slightly light-hearted as I thank and welcome all of you here. Those of you who want to see Thomas Combe rather than me, I thought that might be helpful. A very sincere thank you to all of you for finding time to listen to this lecture tonight. I'm just going to put the light a bit closer to me. And to those friends who are joining, especially the first time, I appreciate this very much. I just want to single a few out, some who may not be here, but said they might be here. So if they aren't here, then they're ghostly thanks to those who aren't here among those I've seconded out here. I'm not sure who's here from St. Barnabas's. I see Maggie's here. And I think Tom, our organist and choir master, might join us a little later, and Matthew, the deacon and fellow of Worcester. But my actual parish priest is here. Jeremy, the rector of Woodstock, former provost of Dundee Cathedral. Very warm welcome to you and to all from Woodstock Parish Church as well. And also among others clergy here, I wanted to particularly welcome a very dear long-standing friend, David Mayhew, formerly the vicar of Holy Trinity Commentary. I think we may be joined tonight by Jessica, the librarian of Pusey House, who kindly photographed the title pages of the sermons of Father Noel. And fourthly, my brother-in-law is certainly here, Bill. Welcome to you and his cousin Anne. Lastly, by no means least, though I'm not sure one of them is currently here at the moment, someone who was going to join us for Family Connections, who may be joining us at some point, is Carol, who is several times the great niece of Thomas and Martha Combe, who very kindly sent me photocopies from the family Bible and a photograph of Martha, which I shall be using tonight. Finally, one person who's definitely here is Hattie from St. Andrew's Church, who is several times the great niece of Florence, the second wife of Thomas Hardy. Without much further ado, thank you very much, everyone who is here tonight. Thomas Hardy, let me move on from me. Wait a minute, that's gone wrong. Yes. Oh, yes, I was going to show that photograph of St. Barnabas taken by Henry Taunt in 1875. So you can see it. Thomas Hardy was assistant architect to Arthur Blomfield from 1862 to 1867, who was shortly afterwards chosen by Thomas Combe as the architect for St. Barnabas's Church in Oxford. He wrote about the church 30 years later. In Jude the Obscure, St. Barnabas's became St. Silas's. The church of ceremonies. Oxford was itself Hardy's Christminster, and the suburb of Jericho, Beersheba. Jude's cousin and common-law wife, Sue, frequented the place on their return to Christminster. And I'm not going to attempt to do the accent, so I'll just do it as it comes. Maybe Alban would be better. Alban would be a lot better than this, and Tracy. There is a strange, indescribable perfume or atmosphere about you tonight, Sue, he said. It is incense. Incense? I've been to the service at St. Silas's, and I was in the fumes of it. Oh, St. Silas's. Yes, I go there sometimes. Indeed, you go there. One night he came to St. Silas's looking for her. Jude entered the church. The prevalent silence seemed to contain a faint sound, explicable as a breathing or a sobbing, which came from the other end of the building. high overhead, above the chancel steps, Jude could discern a huge, solidly constructed Latin cross, as large, probably, as the original it was designed to commemorate. It seemed to be suspended in the air by invisible wires. It was set with large jewels, which faintly glimmered in some weak ray caught from outside as the cross swayed to and fro in a silent and scarcely perceptible motion. Later authors whose books referred to the church included Evelyn Waugh, P.D. James, Joanna Trollope, and A.N. Wilson. Colin Dexter, in the first Inspector Morse novel, The Dead of Jericho, wrote of the looming, ominous bulk of St. Barnabas's Great Tower. In his poem entitled St. Barnabas, Oxford, John Betjeman referred to its polygrammatical lacing of bricks amidst the reddened remorselessness of Cardigan Street. Good Lord, as the Angelus floats down the road, Byzantine St. Barnabas be thine abode. The foundation, section 1, that was the introduction, the consecration. The foundation stone of St. Barnabas was laid on the 24th of April, 1868. Jackson's Oxford Journal reflected, not many years ago, the meadows in this direction, which were flooded in winter, were known as Ward's Woods. The site of the church was on the land owned by George Wood. On the Tuesday, the 19th of October, 1869, the feast day of Oxford's patron saints and friars wide, Bishop Samuel Wilberforce consecrated St. Barnabas' Church. The Illustrated London News referred to the grand ritualistic procession from St. Paul's Church, Walton Street, in which the bishops of Nassau and Minnesota took part. Jackson's journal for the 23rd of October, 1869, contained a full report, recording that every part of the sacred edifice was crowded with a highly respectable congregation, including a large number of junior members of the university. The sexes were separated, the females occupying the northern and the males the southern side of the church. The procession down Cardigan Street had indeed been of a very imposing character. It was headed by the two church wardens, Messrs. Hutt and Cowderoy, and the Bishop of Oxford, preceded by his pastoral staff and the Archdeacon of Oxford. A large cross and several banners were borne aloft in the air. The procession, numbering 100 people, consisted of the choirs of St. Paul's and St. Barnabas's, the clergy who had foregathered at St. Paul's, and some members of the university. They sang the processional hymn, "Onward, Christian Soldiers," until reaching the church door. At that point, the bishop was received in the usual way, a petition presented praying his lordship to consecrate the church. The prayers were said by the new incumbent, Montague Henry Noel, followed by the curate of St. Paul's, the Reverend W. Yates. The first lesson was read by Canon James Ridgway, the principal of Culham College, and the second by Adolphus Hackman, brother of the vicar of St. Paul's. Bishop Wilberforce preached on the text of Acts 18, verse 10. "For I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee, for I have much people in this city." His exposition of the text was followed by a forcible allusion to the Christian liberality of the founder of the church. And it concluded by requesting the alms of the congregation, ALMS alms, which would be devoted to the organ fund. The article contained the full text of the sentence of consecration, which was then read by the registrar J.M. Davenport. Wilberforce insisted on facing north, taking the position prescribed by the rubric of the Book of Common Prayer, while the bishops of Nassau and Minnesota took the eastward position. The bishop would have found the northward position very difficult during the prayer of consecration. He was described as a phantom celebrant, as he was obscured by the baldacchino, which is also narrow at both ends and was, of course, built for the celebration of the Mass ad Orientem. Wilberforce recalled in his diary, disagreeable service, acolyte running about, paste squares for bread, etc. But the church is a great gift. George W. Russell recalled the comments of someone who attended the consecration service. The opening of St. Barnabas may be regarded as epoch-making in the history of the Anglo-Catholic movement. The fine and dignified character of the founder, the preparatory work done by Mr. Hackman, the Vicar of St. Paul's, Oxford, from which parish the district assigned to St. Barnabas was taken, and the novel character of the Italian basilica style of architecture, all seem to be open the way for a new departure. And when to those was added the strong personality of the first vicar, but Mr. Noel, the first vicar, and Mark, the diverse gifts of his two curates, it was clear that something was bound to come of the new foundation, and so it turned out. I want to just also thank, by the way, Father Christopher, the current vicar, for permission to photograph. I'm going to let me just break for one moment to mention this. There's an extraordinary. There's a photograph album that belonged to the first vicar, Montague Henry Noel, which is an incredible resource of material for Anglo-Catholics history and also, of course, the travels, including Russia, done in the late 19th century. It was a gift to him on the 25th anniversary of his incumbency at St. Barnabas, and some of these are photographs from that album. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. The new vicar was appointed by the church's patron, Thomas Combe, who had himself seen the need for St. Barnabas's and financed the church's consecration. Given the composition of this group, I should preface my presentation on the early history of the Oxford most ritualistic church by some explanatory remarks about both the Oxford movement and ritualism, and I apologize to those who know all of this already, as some of you no doubt do. John Henry Newman wrote in his autobiographical Apologia Pro Vita Sua of 1864, on the 14th of July, 1833, Mr. Keble preached the assize sermon in the university pulpit. It was published under the title of The National Apostasy. I have ever considered and kept the day as the start of the religious movement of 1833. John Keble was professor of poetry at Oxford from 1831 to 1841. His book of devotional poems, The Christian Year, became a bestseller. He was a deeply spiritual man who humbly lived out his last 30 years as a parish priest and spiritual director in Hampshire. Newman himself had undergone a kind of evangelical conversion in his youth. but came under Keble's influence after he joined the senior common room at Oriel. There he also met Edward Bouverie Pusey, who had been to Germany and had been drawn to their school of early biblical criticism. Pusey himself later become a canon of Christ Church and professor of Hebrew. He promoted the formation of Anglican religious communities of celibate priests and nuns. Puseyism was a term used later by those who wanted to vilify the Oxford movement. Its other name was Tractarianism, because from 1833 to 1841, the group that was led by these three published 90 tracts for the Times, most of them anonymously. They covered a wide range of subjects, from ecclesiology to spirituality, from patristics to the sacraments. They emphasized the visible church. The essential message of the Tractarians was that the Church of England was truly Catholic in its via media, middle way between Rome and Protestantism. Newman coined the word Anglican. Anglicanism was indeed Catholic and most loyal to the Church of the Fathers. The apostolic succession they maintained involved the handing down of authority to the bishops of the Church of England and the bestowing of a true priesthood on her clergy through the laying on of hands. The sacraments of the Church were real channels of divine grace and central to its ministry. The Catholic faith involved a spiritual life of prayer and private devotion under spiritual direction. The Book of Common Prayer and its rubrics should be used in a truly Catholic sense. In the final tract, Tract 90, Newman argued that even the 39 articles could be interpreted in a Catholic rather than a solely Protestant sense. This was more than the University of Oxford could tolerate. Soon afterwards, Newman left his parish and started a small community at Littlemore before entering the Roman Catholic Church in October 1845. Others followed. Archdeacon Manning succeeded, and both he and Newman were later to become cardinals. All but one of the sons of William Wilberforce, the slave emancipator, went over to Rome, the exception being Samuel, later Bishop of Oxford and Winchester. Not long after Newman's secession, religious communities began in the Church of England among men and women, and Pusey took an active part in fostering them. The so-called second generation pushed out the liturgical limits of the Tractarians, who had not been overly concerned with ritual and externals. Ritualism soon developed and found its first manual in the Directorium Anglicanum by John Purchas, published in 1858. Some ritualists became more Roman than Rome itself, adopting an eastward position faced by priests, deacons and subdeacons wearing mass vestments, who also absolved penitents in confessionals. Their altars were richly attired and blazed with candles. Their processions were led by incense swung by thurifers, and more candles carried by acolytes around a processional crucifix. Disraeli's Public Worship Act, or Regulation Act of 1874, was intended to put down ritualism as the mass in masquerade, and under its operation, 4 priests were soon imprisoned and became seen as martyrs. This discredited the act, and it failed in its intention. However, it remained on the statute book until it was repealed on the 1st of March, 1965. According to the family Bible, Thomas Combe was born on the 21st of July. Thomas Combe, Martha Combe, section 3. According to the family Bible, Thomas Combe was born on the 21st of July, 1796 in Leicester. He was the second son of 7 children and the eldest son of Thomas and Theodosia Combe. The elder Thomas Combe was a printer and the leading radical bookseller in Leicester. Thomas and his younger brother Harvey entered Repton School in August 1808. After leaving school, he joined his father's bookselling and printing business in Leicester. The younger Thomas first moved to Oxford around 1824 to assist Joseph Parker in his new bookshop in Tell Street. Without any prospect of partnership with Parker, Combe moved briefly to London in 1826 and then returned to Leicester to share his father's business in Gallow Tree Gate as a bookseller. After his father's death, Combe moved to Oxford. Oxford University Press was divided into two sides under different managers, the learned classical side and the Bible side. Combe was appointed by the delegates as superintendent of the learned side on the 24th of June, 1836, with a salary of £450. It was stipulated in his contract that he should reside in a house provided by the board, with an annual rent of £50. That's the house in the quadrangle of OUP. He was allocated to University Press, was the address, or North House, one of a pair of semi-detached managers' houses in the OUP quadrangle, where he lived for the rest of his life, and his widow resided there until her death in 1893. John Henry Newman introduced him to Martha Howell Bennett Edwards and married them at St. Ebb's Church on the 3rd of September, 1840. She had been born in Hereford around 1806 and baptized at All Saints Church on the 21st of September, 1809. Martha was the eldest daughter of John Edwards. The family moved 1777 to 1850. The family moved to Oxford in 1819. John established a furnishing ironmongery in the High Street, from which he had retired by the time of the 1841 census. Thomas Combe succeeded the very able Samuel Collingwood as printer to the university in 1841. He was also appointed a partner in the Bible press, whom purchased sufficient shares to become a senior partner in 1871. He relinquished his superintendence of the learned side, and under his management, the Bible press expanded. The university showed its gratitude by conferring on him an honorary MA in March 1859. He had himself become not only a very successful man of business, but also one of considerable means. He and his wife became major patrons of the Pre-Raphaelites, especially of John Everett Millay and William Holman Hunt. They were a childless couple, and Hunt became almost a son to them and had a room in their house. Holman Hunt recalled, "There was a mill then out of use at Wolvercote, and we, Combe himself, wended our way there not infrequently in the character of searchers after the picturesque." Combe bought the almost derelict Wolvercote paper mill, of which the Dukes of Marlborough had been landlords since around 1720. The conveyance was dated the 14th of August, 1855. The old mill had supplied handmade paper to OUP since the late 17th century. He pulled it down and rebuilt it and equipped it. The old manual methods of production were now replaced by machinery. He introduced the division of labor along a system akin to an assembly line, which maximized output. The enterprise augmented his personal wealth considerably. His appearance gained him the nickname of Patriarch to the young pre-Raphaelites and later the Jerichoites. One of his reading boys recalled him as a very fine-looking man with long white hair and beard, piercing dark eyes, and a striking face and head, which, it was remarked after his death, bore a striking resemblance to those given by Michelangelo to the patriarch Moses. He was indeed a paterfamilias to the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, to his employees, and to the poor of Jericho. I'm not sure whether this man who I'm about to show you is actually here, and apologies if he doesn't like the picture. The archivist of OUP, Dr. Martin Moore, has written, in all but name, Combe was squire of Jericho. With the collaboration of another like-minded partner, Edward Pickard Hall, he sought to educate and entertain the employees. They augmented a drum and fife band for the boys and a brass band for the men. These led the Sun. This is, of course, a much later, 1905, I think, this postcard. These led to the Sunday processions to St. Paul's Church. Combe started a night school in 1853. With such an interesting scheme of instruction over 5 evenings a week that one old boy described it as an extraordinary test of endurance. However, fondly remembered outings and boat trips were also organized for their recreation. Combe and Hall also ran a Sunday school, and Combe set up the University Press Savings Bank. Thomas Combe's relationship with the leading Tractarians predated the Oxford movement itself. His unmarried sister, with whom he had resided when he first moved to Oxford, took lodgers, and they included John Henry Newman, Edward Pusey, and Harold Froude. He listened to Newman's sermons at the University Church. Correspondence between the two men continued long after Newman became a Roman Catholic. Combe, I've found this in the diaries, Newman's diaries, Combe ordered a set of the Tracts of the Times in December 1833. St. Paul's Church in Walton Street was built partly for the employees of Oxford University Press. The new parish, was carved out of those of St. Thomas and St. Giles. The second vicar, Canon Alfred Hackman, was a strong supporter of the Tractarians, who became actively involved there and was a church warden. Christopher Hibbert has rightly described 19th century Jericho as a citadel of the Oxford movement. St. Paul's proportions were described in a volume, History, Gazetteer, and Directory of the County of Oxford, published in 1852, my copy here. It is 80 feet long and 39 feet broad. Its style was Ionic, and it was Oxford's only Parisian church. Jericho. Jericho takes its name from the Jericho Gardens, which lay to the west of the Radcliffe Infirmary. I couldn't find any picture of it, unfortunately, after the hospital opened in 1870. Gardens themselves date back to the 17th century and are mentioned in Anthony Wood in 1688. Jericho House was already on Walton Street as an inn, erected circa 1850. The area itself remained virtually unpopulated until the end of the 18th century. The Oxford Navigation Society's 91-mile-long canal reached Oxford in 1790 and thereby defined the western boundary of the new suburb of Jericho, which stretched eastwards to Walton Street. In 1825, the Jericho Iron and Brass Foundry was founded by William Carter and built at Jericho's northern extremity in Walton Well Road. It was to become Lucy's Eagle Ironworks. The Oxford University Press then moved to Walton Street in 1830. Many small businesses soon opened in the area. Jericho was Oxford's first suburb, and it rapidly expanded, bounded to the north by St. Sepulchre's Cemetery. In 1833, Jericho's population was nearly 1,600. Housing was erected to minimal standards quickly and cheaply. Sanitary and sewerage conditions were clearly deficient. There were major outbreaks of cholera in 1832, 1848, and 1854. In 1848, Dr. W.B. Ormond's survey on the sanitary condition of Oxford marked out Jericho as a center of disease. Robert Sire, I think that's how you pronounce him, Robert Sire Hogarth, an engineer and cartographer based in Oxford, produced a map of the city in 1850, specifically for sanitary purposes. It showed that Jericho had already reached almost to its current size, built in a paralleled grid pattern, stretching down from Walton Street towards the canal. It looked much the same, but clear in Cassell's weekly dispatch atlas of 1860. Drainage improvement enabled further development in 1849, which was completed by the time of the first Ordnance Survey map of 1876. Owing to the rapid expansion of Jericho towards the canal, the accommodation available in St. Paul's became clearly insufficient, and extra services were provided at St. Sepulchre's Cemetery Chapel for OUP employees. In 1835, the new parish of St. Paul's had a population of 1,600, but by the late 1860s, it had risen to 4,000. However, the church would only accommodate 630. The Combe saw the need to provide a new church in an area chiefly of the poorer classes, which would also advance the Catholic movement in the Church of England. In slightly wrong. Yes, okay. I got those two in the wrong order. So anyway, excuse me for that. Section 5, the church and its architecture. In 1839, Thomas Combe had become secretary of the Oxford Society for the Study of Gothic Architecture, and in 1864, he had paid for the building of the Radcliffe Infirmary Chapel in a Gothic style by Arthur Blomfield, 1829 to 1899, which has been described as being in the style of 1300. He re-employed the same architect for St. Barnabas's. Blomfield wrote to Combe that he had chosen to revert to the earliest arrangement of Christian churches, namely that of the basilica, in its broad features. Thus, he concurred with Combe's own strong desire to adopt the basilican model. In the same published letter to Combe, Blomfield acknowledged that Combe had left him unfettered, apart from distinct and sensible instructions. He was given almost a free hand, but told that it should be large enough for 1,000 worshippers, sound in construction, and the interior dignified. Nothing was to be wasted on external appearances. The published version included a ground plan. Its Italianate Romanesque style in the form of a basilica showed marked similarities to some famous Italian churches, but contrasted sharply with the prevalent Gothic style, which was favored by other contemporary churches in Oxford. Blomfield wrote to Combe, "I need not here enter into the description of the early basilica, as most lovers of church architecture are perfectly familiar with the simplicity and beauty of its arrangement. Those who are not can refer to Gailey Knight's plan of San Clemente in Rome." The architect, the journal of the architect, published an article on the new church on the 13th of August, 1870, which described the exterior succinctly and functionally. The material at first thought of by the architect, Mr. Arthur W. Blomfield, for the entire construction of this church was concrete, but it was found that the main walls could be built much more cheaply of ordinary rubble work in blue lias mortar, cemented without to protect it from the weather, and plaster within to receive the decorations. Portland cement, however, was employed for steps and windowsills, and in all positions where stone would ordinarily be found, except on the columns and capitals, where Bath stone is used. I'm still quoting. It needs scarcely be added that no molding or other feature in imitation of wrought stonework has been admitted into the concrete work. The Oxford Times described the exterior as having no pretensions to architectural beauty, being built of brick and concrete without the least attempt at ornament. Internally, it is of noble dimensions, lofty and well proportioned. It kept the identity of the donor anonymous, referring to the church as the munificent gift of a gentleman residing in St. Paul's. For the decoration of the interior, Combe confided to Holman Hunt that he had rejected the use of mosaic, which was nevertheless used in a richly decorated apse. This was clearly in a Byzantine style. Its semi-dome is a richly gold pantocrator, set against the dark blue sky filled with golden stars. Below the figure of Christ is a frieze of the apostles. John Julius Norwich described it as an east end that glistens with gold leaf. Thomas Combe was very pleased with the result, as he wrote to William Holman Hunt, "I wish you could see it. It is a basilica. After the Cathedral of Torcello, near Venice, it is the perfect basilica in this country, and bids fair to do Blomfield, the architect, much credit." A campanile, based on that of Torcello Cathedral, was added in 1872 at the cost of £789, bringing the overall cost of the building to £6,492, originally a separate structure, It was joined to the church in 1887 and re-roofed in 1892. The four-faced clock was installed in 1890 to encourage punctuality among the employees of the OUP. Blomfield also added a lady chapel to the east end of the Northern Aisle in 1888 to 9. Section 6, and the penultimate section, for those of you who are weary, is a very short to this. The first vicar was chosen as the vicariate or incumbency of Montague Henry Noel. The first vicar was chosen by coup. He was Father Montague Henry Noel, 1840 to 1929, who served as parish priest for 30 years. His appointment as vicar was announced in the press in March 1870. Noel laid the foundations for much that has epitomized the life of the parish ever since. Montague Henry Noel was the second son of the Honourable and Reverend Francis James Noel, 1793 to 1854, who was the fifth son of Sir Gerald Noel, second Baronet, Edwards MP, and who it was listed in the he was listed in the clergy list of 1841 as Vicar of Teston and Nettlestead near Maidstone, Kent. Montague Henry was born at Teston Rectory on the 18th of December 1840 and went to Eton and is listed there at the time of the 1851 census as having been born in Teston, Kent. He was confirmed by Bishop Wilberforce. He came up to Christ Church from Eton, matriculating on the 29th of June, 1859. Noel became acquainted with Oxford's leading Anglo-Catholic clergy. The Gospeller recalled over 30 years later that Noel, you'll see some photographs of him in a moment, was not infrequently at the choral celebrations of Merton College Chapel, where good churchmen were wont to gather. The services were well rendered, considered advanced. Noel was a member of the Brotherhood of the Holy Trinity, which was founded by Dr. Pusey. Noel's BA was conferred on the 10th of December 1863 and his MA on the 31st of June 1866. Samuel Noel Wilberforce ordained Noel in the parish church of Lavington in Sussex on Sunday, that's his own church, Sunday the 24th of September 1865. He served his first curacy very briefly at St Mary's Caldecote in Monmouthshire, on the shores of the Bristol Channel. Edward Turberville Williams was the vicar from 1841 to 1885 and had overseen the restoration of the church in 1851 with 450 sittings. He had been largely responsible for the founding of the church school in 1847. Noel worked among the poor with the vicar. Excellent. His second curacy was at the Church of St. Peter's and Paul in Wantage, under the tutelage of its renowned vicar, Canon William Butler, from 1865 to 1869. Father Noel was later to become a member of the Anglo-Catholic Society of the Holy Cross in 1871. I should point out that Wantage was a huge influence on Noel, and Canon Butler certainly was. Charges of Roman Catholic behavior were made from the outset. A certain E. Matthews wrote a long letter to the Church Times on the 17th of August, 1870, entitled Bowing to the Cross at St. Barnabas Church. He had attended an 8 o'clock service on the previous Saturday. The minister, the reader of the scriptures, and the choir evidently regarded the acts of turning to the east, bowing to the cross, and crossing themselves as a part of their worship. He went on to show how these had taken place. After the service, an exchange of questions and answers occurred outside between visitors and choristers. One visitor was curious as to why they bowed to the cross, to which the chorister replied, "We are told to do so. It is our religion." The visitor remarked that the cross was simply made by a carpenter, and that it was wrong to bow to it, and the Bible gave no such command. After further discussion, a chorister assured another visitor, "No, we are Catholics, but not Roman Catholics." Mr. Matthews concluded, "I will add that there are many who, for the sake of the young, for the sake of the purity of their religion and the liberties of England, are praying earnestly that Mr. Nurl and all his ritualists may abandon that system. Those who did not kneel at St. Barnabas have faith that Mr. Nurl may become as zealous and earnest in teaching evangelical religion as he is now in promoting ritualism." Shortly after the church's Diamond Jubilee, the vicar received a letter from a certain Mrs. Blanche Child, née Puckle, who had been confirmed at St. Barnabas in April 1870. This is written in 1929. "I still have a very vivid recollection of the beautiful service and your lovely church, which for varying reasons I have been unable to attend since. After the confirmation service, the first I believe to be held in your church, the carriage horses took fright and rushed off, the tragedy being narrowly averted by the gallant action of the clergy, who were instrumental in stopping it. Thomas Combe died suddenly on Tuesday, the 29th of October, 1872, and his death was attributed to angina. Angina is now regarded as a symptom, and the cause was probably ischemic heart failure. His coffin lay in state in St. Barnabas. Hundreds lined the streets for the procession to his funeral, which took the form of a choral requiem Eucharist. Canon Henry Liddon wrote to Mr. Gladstone with a request that his body be interred in the wall of the church. Mr. Combe's merits and services have been so altogether exceptional that I make bold to ask you to speak to the Home Secretary in favor of the application. He explained that it was his widow's wish. The Prime Minister then forwarded the letter to Mr. Bruce, the Home Secretary. "I ventured and hope the law may permit and your disposition lead you to allow this interment." The Home Secretary, however, decided against it. So crowds again watched the funeral procession as the funeral procession went to St. Sepulchre's Cemetery for his burial. Jackson's Oxford Journal stated that his death will be deeply deplored, not only by his own intimate friends, but also by his employees and the poorer inhabitants of the north of Oxford, to whom he was a kind friend and a generous benefactor. St. Barnabas was a formative influence on the poet and hymn writer Henry Carey Shuttleworth, 1850 to 1900, who later became Professor of Pastoral Theology at King's College, London, and a minor canon of St. Paul's Cathedral. After 8 years as a schoolboy at Forest School, he won the Dyke Scholarship in January 1869 and entered St. Mary's Hall, where a contemporary described him as a most devoted churchman of the ritualistic school. He had much to offer the new church, both as a gifted musician and a young man with enthusiasm for pastoral ministry to the boys of the parish. These gifts were certainly not lost on the vicar, to whom he proved himself to be very useful, to whom he, in the words of Noel, proved himself to be very useful, and while still a layman helped the Sunday school, which was started before we had a day school. And he was always ready to help the men and boys in any way he could in his spare time, being always thoroughly to be relied on for anything, and for the good tone of the set. And the good tone he said. Father Noel invited Shuttleworth to live with him and the other clergy in the clergy house, or the vicarage, in 1872. Shuttleworth was ordained deacon in Advent 1873 and priest a year later, energetically serving as Father Noel's curate until he went to St. Paul's Cathedral in November 1876. There were also daily offices and Eucharists, and the church immediately became known for its advanced ritualism, exceeding that of almost any other Anglican churches in Oxford. In fact, all. Writing in 1892 on the religious life of Oxford, G.W. Gent observed that St. Barnabas was certainly the most conspicuous of the high churches, both from the grandeur of its ceremonies and from the number of undergraduates who attended its services. George W. E. Russell came up to Oxford from Harrow in October 1872, and on his second Sunday as a fresher at Christ Church, found my way to St. Barnabas, being led thither by a Harrow friend, one Charles Gore, scholar of Balliol. Gore's biographer mentioned that the two of them used to take walks together in term and vacation, visited the Cowley Fathers and the Church of St. Barnabas, attending Lyddon sermons. Church was keeping its dedication festival. The service was solemn evensong, which he found the most inspiring and uplifting worship I had ever joined. My impressions of it are as clear as yesterday's. The unadorned simplicity of the fabric, emphasizing by contrast the blaze of light and color around the altar, the floating cloud of incense, the expressive and unfussy ceremonial, the straightforward preaching, and most impressive of all, the large congregation of men, old and young, rich and poor, undergraduates and artisans, all singing evangelical hymns with one heart and voice. It was as if ever there was on earth congregational worship, and I, for one, have never seen its like. The clergy and worshippers were a family, and the church was a home. Many years later, Bishop Gore exclaimed from the pulpit that he loved St. Barnabas. Preaching there in 1912, shortly after becoming Bishop of Oxford, Gore informed the congregation that after his ordination as a priest, he had celebrated his first Eucharist at St. Barnabas. The diarist and rural clergyman, Francis Kilbert, attended evensong on Ascension Day 1876, and described the experience very unfavorably in his diary. The church was full. The clergy and choir entered with a procession, incense bearers and a great gilt cross. The thurifiers and acolytes being in short white surplices over scarlet cassocks, and the last priests in the procession wearing a biretta and the chasuble stiff with gold. Kilvert was unimpressed by the sermon and described what happened during the Magnificat as pure Mariolatry. The final procession around the church also included 3 banners waving and moving above the heads of the people in a weird, strange, ghostly march. The poor Roman church hard by is quite plain and low church in its ritual compared with St. Barnabas in its festival dress on high days and holidays. In 1876, the only other church in Oxford where both vestments were worn and also there were candles on the altar was St. Thomas's. This can be compared with Charles Mackeson's figures in his guide to the churches of London and the suburbs. By 1879, there were still, according to Mackeson, only 33 churches out of 868 in London where vestments were worn, and 43 with candles on their altars. Even more significantly, there were only 13 in which incense was used. All 3 had been in use at St. Barnabas's from the beginning. The same person who recalled the consecration to Russell described the ritual as more ornate than anything before seen in Oxford. Eucharistic vestments, silk and coloured, being used as well as lighted candles and even incense. However, St. Barnabas's was not directly affected by the prosecutions under the Public Worship Regulations Act of 1874, designed to put down ritualism in the Church of England. Wilberforce's successor as Bishop of Oxford, John Macanus, dismissed complaints against Noel and lauded him as a brother who is devoting his energies, his time and his money to the welfare, as he believes, of his flock. However, the church suffered from the proselytizing campaign of one of his former curates who had become a Roman Catholic. A contemporary cartoon portrayed it as Barnabas Junction, with Cardinals Newman and Manning waiting for others to change here for Rome. Another cartoon, that Newman wasn't a cardinal at this point, another cartoon portrayed Newman welcoming those crossing the Bridge of Sighs. Steadfastly, Montague Henry Noel remains a stalwart apologist for the Catholic faith within the established church. In 1872, he stated plainly in the Sermon on Confession that he had labored for peace. I tried to teach the Catholic faith in its fullness, as I always hope to do, as long as God gives me breath. As a fine preacher, many of his sermons were published not long ago now. Drawing undergraduates during term time, the church was often packed for high mass on Sundays. Father Noel, like his 2 immediate successors, was a gifted musician, and the rich liturgy of the Book of Common Prayer was complemented by a fine choir and a succession of excellent organists. Father Noel was keen to include the children in the worship and life of the church and began children's services. St. Paul's School for Boys had been built by George Edmund Street as diocesan architect in 1855-6 and was transferred to St. Barnabas's. Father Noel paid £700 for a new school in Juxon Street to be built for St. Paul's. St. Barnabas's Girls and Infant School was built in 1872. These schools remained church property under the Education Act of 1870, so the buildings were maintained as 2 parishes. 2 charitable ladies defrayed the cost for the Parochial Institute, which was founded in 1891. It provided what the last vicar, Father Jonathan Beswick, described as 3 decent-sized communal rooms and residential accommodation for an assistant priest and caretaker. One downstairs room was originally the reading room and another the billiard room. A very short epilogue. The Advowson remained in Thomas Combe's hands until his death in 1872, and then passed to the Bishop of Oxford. In 1886, it passed to Keble College in exchange for St. Martin's. When Noel left in November 1899, the warden of Keble College approached the Reverend C.H. Bickerton Hudson, who had already been a curate to Father Noel for 19 years. His poor health made it a very difficult task, even with the assistance of an able curate. After 2 years, he resigned the living, which then passed to Cyril Hallett. The new incumbent ended Noel's class for chaps, which had been held in the vicarage since before the children's services. Father Hallett also made changes in liturgical usage and was especially involved in church music. Dom Anselm Hughes described St. Barnabas under Hallett as baroque in its furnishings and still more in its music, which was of the Gounod type. Last page. The painted glass murals of the Te Deum were added to the north wall between 1905 and 1911 in a technique known as Opus Sectine. Hallett joined the university's mission to Central Africa in 1911, becoming Archdeacon of Zanzibar. We move rapidly forward at the very end. In 2010, Father Jonathan wrote, St. Barnabas was built as a place that would draw people to God in worship and to help them know his love in the way they were treated. Goals that are no less noble today than they were 141 years ago. I took this final photograph at the Mass to celebrate the church's sesquicentenary in October 2019. Thomas Combe's most ritualistic church is still going strong, 152 years after its consecration. Thank you all for listening, and I'm sorry it's been so long.